September 2012, Gainesville, Florida. A Florida University student, Christian Aguilar, is missing.
Trying to figure out what's going on. You're trying to figure out who's involved, why they're involved. And in a case like this, there were so many different twists and turns.
All people of this age have an extreme digital signature. And what we were able to see with Christian Aguilar is that by about 5:30, his digital signature just disappeared.
Investigators soon suspect foul play may be involved.
Someone comes in and is talking about hitchhikers and duct tape and love triangles and missing persons, that you're going to need to start looking under the cover.
He was acting so suspiciously during his interrogation that the police realized that this guy has walked right into the police station and is basically saying that he did it.
They initially came in to talk about a missing person in a love triangle where 2/3 of the love triangle are in the building, but the other third is the one that's missing.
Police uncover a meticulously planned and brutal murder.
This is a very clearly premeditated murder. This thing was thought out months in advance.
This is the tragic story of Christian Aguilar, the disturbing mind of his killer, and how a close friendship ends in murder.
This is a real case of jealousy.
He was jealous of the life that he had. He was jealous of the opportunities that he had. He was going to make sure that Christian could not have those opportunities anymore.
November 16th, 1993. A baby boy, Christian Aguilar, is born to adoring parents Carlos and Claudia Aguilar in Miami, Florida.
Christian changed my life. I always wanted to be a father, but I think Christian was a gift. He likes to read a lot. His humor is like mine. He makes us laugh so much, but he didn't want to do it in public. But in private, in the family, with friends, he was so hilarious. He can make jokes out of nowhere. For me, he was the best brother that I can see for Alexander. And I think Alexander always looked up to Christian. We, like a normal family, we spent together so much time over the weekends doing activities with them that we forgot about the rest of the world. And that's the truth. And it was not because we were not compassionate or nothing like that. It's just that that's life. We didn't have a lot, but we have enough. And enough was good for us.
For high school, Christian attends Doral Academy and quickly becomes friends with fellow classmates Erica Freeman and Pedro Bravo.
Erica was always an excellent student. She was like the president of the reading club, and Christian was always around those type of people. I think Pedro Bravo also was an excellent student. We know that they were all in a group of excellent individuals that were going to make it really good in a school. Everybody was going for their goals in class and to the university, and they wanted to pursue careers. They have these dreams about going to the university, and that was the main theme between them. The three of them were extremely focused on getting their career achievements, and they were doing similar activities that bonded together.
Erica and Pedro start dating in high school, but Erica ends the relationship when they finish, as she's attending college in Gainesville, over 300 miles away.
Erica Freeman knows that she's not staying in Miami. She's going to come to Santa Fe and then go on to the University of Florida. That's her plan. She's been dating Pedro Bravo for a couple of years in high school. And it's been a rocky relationship, tumultuous at times relationship. So she decides that she's going to break up with him. That does not go well. It's very difficult. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of outbursts by Mr. Bravo about the ending of their relationship. And she makes a decision that she's really going to have a clean cut. She does that, and she cuts off communication with him. And that, in her mind, is sort of the end of the relationship, and she's moving on.
You usually remain Facebook friends with your ex unless it's a pretty dramatic break. And that's what happened here. Losing that Facebook connection clearly sent Pedro over the edge. He has a diary entry talking about how terrible it was. I feel a piece of my world ending already, though now begins my journey to win her back.
Unbeknownst to Pedro, Erica and Christian begin a relationship when they start at the University of Florida and Santa Fe College.
They moved at the same time to Gainesville, and they start sharing more things over there because they were new in that city. A month later, he told me that he was very interested in having a relationship with Erica.
In our culture, we see it in a different way, and that for us, if that person was a good friend morally, we never will look at his girlfriend, wife, or anybody to start a relationship with. I told him that it can have consequences. I was concerned. We already knew that Pedro was having psychological issues.
Who is Pedro Bravo?
He was certainly a charming guy. He was considered a class clown at the high school. He had a long-term relationship with a girl for 3 years. So he certainly had the ability, it seems, to portray himself as a nice, happy-go-lucky, fun guy. He also was talented in a lot of ways. You look at his art. Beautiful artwork. Ignoring the content for a second, the beautiful imagery, it's remarkable talent. So he had a lot of talent. A lot of folks go through a terrible breakup when they're in high school, around the same time that Pedro did. His girlfriend's going off to college and he's staying home at college. It's a pretty normal story. Those two people are kind of are moving away from each other, and his girlfriend decided he didn't want to be with him anymore. And Pedro did not take that well, very clearly. And it's obvious that over the course of that summer, he descended mentally very, very fast.
Pedro starts obsessing about Erica and how he can get the relationship back on track.
He has sort of a master plan of how he's going to get her back in his life. It's actually written in his diary that he has sort of planned all this out on how he was going to show up in Gainesville, very carefully, very slowly reinitiate contact with her. He wasn't going to pressure her. He was going to try to win her into a friendship. Once he got her into a friendship, then he was going to try to turn that friendship back to a romance by showing her how much he loved her and how much he cared about her. Eventually, he shows up in August, but in the late August, early September, he makes contact with Erica, and he says, "I'm here," and he kind of reveals himself to her, why he's doing what he's doing.
But Erica isn't happy, and although she tries to protect him by not posting on social media, Pedro finds out she is dating Christian.
Erica realized that, when she broke up with Pedro, that he was not handling this well. And she did not want him to know about any relationship with Chris. So anything that was out there, she was trying to keep it from being in the public eye. Chris, on the other hand, was very happy about his relationship with Erica. And it's not that he didn't care about Pedro. He did. It was just that, in his mind, I think, that relationship was over. Christian Aguilar's ex-girlfriend has Christian Aguilar's Facebook password. They share that password with Pedro, and once he gets into Christian's Facebook account, he can see that Erica's not telling him the truth. That there are photographs from that Facebook account that were private that showed Erica and Chris in bed together, not unclothed, but certainly in a manner which no two people would be together unless they were in a relationship.
Crushed and feeling betrayed, Pedro threatens suicide, and Erica meets up with him.
There were 2 meetings between Erica and Pedro. The first was after Pedro texted her and told her that he was going to kill himself or hurt himself, and she met with him on Hull Road at the University of Florida in a bus shelter. She found him there. Her friends waited for her. It was about a 45-minute conversation where she told him, "I'm not going to have a relationship with you again." The next meeting was at Santa Fe, where they were both students. They agreed to meet at a bench in front of the Santa Fe Zoo, and he presented to her a lot of artwork that he had done, where he's an exceptionally good artist, that he had created for her to show his love, and she once again told him, I'm not going to be in a relationship with you.
But Pedro is not going to be deterred.
Chris just can't exist anymore. He can't be part of this picture, because this is going to stop every plan that he has made throughout this entire summer to get her back.
September 2012. 18-year-old Pedro Bravo has just discovered his ex-girlfriend, Erica Freeman, is dating his close best friend, Christian Aguilar. Feeling betrayed, Pedro asks Christian to meet up.
There are only 3 people who know what's going on. It's Erica, Pedro, and Chris. Chris has put off Pedro once because of a test to meet, and the only 3 people who know that they're going to meet are those 3. So the timeline of events here is that he leaves to go meet with Pedro at 2 o'clock, 2:30, something of that nature. Erica expects him back at her apartment to study and hang out at 4:35. So Erica is, by 9 o'clock, she's in full freak out. But by 4 o'clock in the morning, when he hasn't turned up, she's lost it. She's trying constantly. She knows who he's with, and she has no idea what Pedro knows at that moment. She doesn't know that they're in a relationship. So she doesn't really have a reason to be concerned. She's trying, after 7, 8 o'clock, she's trying to get in touch with Pedro to say, where's Chris? Where did you leave Chris? But he's not answering the phone. Their first conversation is about 4:40 in the morning, something like that. The first time that they will meet up that day is at the Gainesville Police Department. They get to the Gainesville Police Department. They speak with someone there who gets a lay of the land of what's happening. This is a University of Florida student who resides on the University of Florida campus. The Gainesville Police Department says this is most likely within the jurisdiction of the University of Florida Police Department, and they direct them to go to the University of Florida Police Department. So they travel to the University of Florida Police Department in separate vehicles and show up there. A police officer asks them some questions, the first one being, who are all of you people? And Erica says, I'm Erica. This is my ex-boyfriend, Pedro Bravo, and the person who's missing is my current boyfriend, Christian Aguilar.
Police take statements from both Erica and Pedro. Pedro's behavior raises suspicion.
Pedro Bravo says Christian's fine. I dropped him off at the end of our day, and as far as I know, he's in fine health and condition.
One fatal flaw from Pedro in speaking to police was that he referred to Christian in the past tense, and he did it a few times.
Pedro Bravo had said that they were having a disagreement and an argument and a fist fight of some sort. And he says, I let him out of the car. And he walks out of the car. Pedro Bravo says to Randy Roberts, if I take you to where I let him out of the car, if I take you to the point of this mythical fight that I say we're having, can I go home with my parents tonight? And at that point, Randy Roberts stops him and says, I need you to turn around and read what's on the wall behind you. Because on the wall behind him is the Miranda rights. So Pedro Bravo does waive Miranda and does agree to continue speaking with law enforcement. And this interview is going to continue on for another probably 6-7 hours beyond the point of the first 2 or 3, which were a missing persons investigation. He does take law enforcement out to an area north of town on 441 near what was Strite's Honda. And he takes them there and says, this is where Christian Aguilar and I had some disagreement.
Pushed him once he stumbled back, tripped him, got on top of him with my knees, like the bruises from the climbing, but got on top of him with my knees. And at that point, I got my entire hand I did one slam to the face, because he already had the wrist from those, but I just one slam to the face, like below the upper lip. Like below the nose, never looked like it hit in there. And after that, it's one or two punches, not too many. Like I didn't continue go beating on him with punches and punches and punches.
And at this point, we have a very active manhunt. You know, the search for Christian Aguilar at this point is now very much in play.
The search started very small with Carlos and with a few officers walking in the woods. We blinked, and there were volunteers pouring in all over the place. Literal buses coming into Gainesville, pulling into the command center.
In the immediate aftermath of Christian's disappearance, there was a galvanizing effect in South Florida, in Gainesville, and in parts of Colombia where his family was from. So people were coming from all around to that area to aid in the search of Christian. There were students from University of Florida, students from Santa Fe College, students from his high school, young people and older folks from all around who aided authorities in trying to find Christian.
You know, Carlos was out there walking, so we were out there walking right behind him, right alongside with him. That grew and grew and grew. The more people that began to talk about it, the more people that began to listen about it, you could see the crowds grow and grow and grow. We had a good problem. We had thousands of searchers, but we didn't know where to look.
Investigators continue interviewing Pedro, and his story keeps changing.
When we talked earlier, when we went over this, you said y'all met at the hub.
Yes.
At 2 o'clock.
2:30.
Yeah, we went through this whole scenario of stuff, and I talked to you about the McDonald's at 1:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning or something, and found out that you hadn't been truthful with me about that part.
Yes.
And a couple other things, and that you actually didn't know what happened to him and where he was and all this. And at some point, you punched him in the face.
Yes.
Put your hands up like this for me. I've been doing this for a really long time, and have to do it for another 10 years. 30 years of doing this, and those don't look like the hands of somebody that beat somebody up. If it didn't happen exactly like that, if you put him somewhere else, or you did something else to him, are you worried about being in more trouble or something? Is that the reason you wouldn't tell me the truth about finding him, or?
I'm already in this much trouble.
But I want to find him.
I understand. But I'm telling you the truth. This is it. You could look around if you want, but you're not going to find him. I didn't do anything like that, so.
Police start examining Pedro's car and phone and uncover evidence that confirms he is lying.
They've searched his car consensually. They took his cell phone, again, consensually, from the electronic signature of his cell phone, pinging off of towers across Gainesville. We know that he drives north, and then he drives east in a sort of convoluted, long trip around Gainesville. None of this is in the direction of anything he has ever really gone to or dealt with in Gainesville. It's not in the direction of his apartment or anything like that. As they start piecing together the cell phone data that shows where he was, they start confronting him with more and more information that's inconsistent with what he's saying.
Oh, my phone was off with power and I turned it off because it had 10% battery life.
What time did you turn your phone back on?
My phone back on
To your best recollection.
at around 1 o'clock when I went to McDonald's or so.
No.
Yes.
Try 4:15. Do you see how it says not available, not available, not available, not available, and then at 4:13:35 you turn the phone back on. So at 4:13 in the morning, in 35 seconds, you turn the phone back on. No. What I'm talking about is at 4:03 you're up here. All right. Your phone's down here at 5:59. So that tells us that you're right in this area for 2 hours. All right. What we want to know is what's going on during those 2 hours.
Well, me and Chris were talking.
We're finding out new stuff that you haven't talked to me about before. You picked up a hitchhiker, according to you.
Yes, correct.
One of the first stories that he gives is the story of the hitchhiker, which he describes as someone who appears to be like a homeless Santa Claus. Someone who is older, has a long white beard, long white hair. He gives very, very in-depth detail as to his clothing. He says what his shoes look like. So he's saying that he's standing on the heels of his shoe. He picks him up and they drive him all the way to the other end of town and leave him by a storage facility. And that shortly thereafter, this is when Chris gets out of the car. When it came to what happened to Chris, Pedro Bravo was unable to give any explanation. He was unable to give any detail. Where did he get out of the car? Why did he get out of the car? What was he doing when he got out of the car? What was his condition when he got out of the car? He didn't have answers for any of those things. What was he wearing? He didn't remember what Chris is wearing, but he was able to describe the shoes and how they were worn by a homeless Santa Claus.
And you took him, dropped him off at the storage facility.
Correct. You can verify this.
That was earlier.
That was earlier, yes.
Back about the time that you got there, 4 something in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. But you were in that area for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. Where were you for 2 hours?
At that place, Walmart.
What were you doing there?
I was just talking with Chris.
So why didn't you tell me this earlier?
Because it was a little chat. It wasn't that much. Like we were just reflecting on little things. It wasn't
Walmart?
At the Walmart, yes.
Why did you leave out the part about sitting in the parking lot at Walmart for 2 hours?
Because we were just sitting there for a while, just talking. It was just something small me and him did. We were just talking there for a bit.
I know, but what we're talking about.
I know. I understand. Yeah.
No detail is too small.
I understand.
When the three of us were in a car earlier, you said it wasn't this far, and you had us turn around, and you said we were coming this way. You said we were coming south.
It was that same area. I remember coming south. Yes.
So you said we're coming south.
Yes.
But now you're telling me you were headed north towards 53rd.
Pedro continues to add details originally missing from his initial story about their argument.
He's really angry at the moment because he's not only shocked that I punched him in the face, but he's kind of off at me for punching him in the face, as I would expect. So he just gets out of the car like he's gonna get out, and then
But he's ridden for a half a mile without doing anything about it. So I'm gonna reach around like this, punch somebody in the face, hard enough that he's gonna sit there and take it for a half a mile and be stunned back. Like you're telling me he's stunned back. Okay. I think I have a better understanding if you're telling us the truth. Okay. I think the issue that we run into here, though, is every single time that we find something out and find out you're not telling us the truth, you have a whole new story.
After hearing Pedro talk them through multiple accounts that conflict with one another, police confront Pedro about Christian's true status and arrest him for the suspected murder of Christian Aguilar.
There's a very powerful moment between Gainesville Police Department Detective Randy Roberts and Pedro Bravo, where he says, "Now, Pedro, you and I both know we're not going to find Christian Aguilar, or you and I both know that Christian Aguilar is not coming home. You and I both know that he's dead." Initially, they were going to hold him on some sort of charge of battery, aggravated battery, because he admitted at some point in the investigation that I had punched him, and then eventually he admits a little more. I punched him and he was bleeding in the back seat. They had enough to hold him for some sort of battery or aggravated battery, but not anything like kidnapping or murder. But as the day developed and sort of went further and further and further into the interviews, ultimately it went from missing person to aggravated battery to murder.
With Pedro arrested, investigators continue the search for Christian Aguilar's remains and try to get the location out of Pedro, who is still pleading his innocence.
Hello, this is a free call from
Pedro Bravo,
an inmate at
the Alachua County Department of the Jail.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
He told you he got into a fight.
Why didn't he defend himself?
He did. He was trying to push me off him.
Why don't you have any marks or anything?
Any marks?
Marks or anything. I haven't seen you, but his family says in the courtroom you didn't have any signs of anything on your hand. I don't see anything. No scratch.
Because I told the police I told the police one side, and then I told them that I got into a fight because I didn't want to leave that out. And now the police are saying...
In the beginning.
Because I was scared, Erica.
Listen, you never lie to the police. You're smart.
Why do you think I told them that? Because I didn't want to lie to the police.
With Pedro in custody, the search for Christian continues for weeks. But tragically, and to the distress of his family and the volunteers searching for him for 22 days, the remains of Christian Aguilar are found on October 15th, 2012.
To some degree, this is a search to see within the first day or two, maybe the first 48 hours, it was a search to see if Christian could be found alive. Beyond 48 hours, probably the statistics would tell us, we're not looking for a live body, but we're looking for remains.
The most difficult part of that information is that we literally had thousands of volunteers that came from Miami, that came from Florida, all sorts of places in Florida and around. And to tell those people, look, we're not searching for Christian alive anymore.
People continued to go out and to find him. His father believed he was alive, and unfortunately they did find him, but he was found deceased.
22 days after he was reported missing, Christian Aguilar's remains are discovered. But will they reveal how he died? October 15th, 2012. The remains of Christian Aguilar are discovered in a remote woodland in North Florida. It is suspected that the 18-year-old was murdered by his friend, Pedro Bravo, and investigators are hoping the autopsy will yield information on how he died.
The body was discovered 23 feet away from the dirt road in this very remote part of Levy County. And 23 feet away is actually consistent with what a lot of experts say. That's about as far as somebody wants to drag a body before it either gets too cumbersome or it gets too psychologically strange for them. It's about as far enough away from the road where you feel like it's concealed, but it's also not so far that you have to be dragging his body for a long period of time.
The university's entomology department was made available to us. They went to the site of the burial while the exhumation was going on, captured the insects that were in the area of the body. They then went to the autopsy and captured the insects that were on the remains of Christian Aguilar. And from that, they were able to determine when that body was placed in that grave within about a 24-hour period, which matched perfectly with when Christian went missing. When they find Chris, he's bound at his wrists, at his mouth, and at his ankles with duct tape.
With little arising from the autopsy, investigators start compiling circumstantial evidence to strengthen their case.
Every business along the routes that they drove, they're getting surveillance films for the streets. Any stoplights or anything that had surveillance, any of the businesses that had surveillance, whether it was Zaxby's or Best Buy or Walmart, law enforcement was getting that material together. They were doing really good work with the computers and cell phones that were involved in the case. Those investigations sort of culminated within the next couple of months.
Trawling the CCTV footage, the level of planning that went into the murder becomes evident.
A few days before the date of the murder, he goes to the local Walmart. He buys what we described as sort of the murderer's starter pack. He buys ZzzQuil, which has diphenhydramine in it. He buys a couple bottles of Gatorade that he's ultimately going to put the diphenhydramine in. He buys a knife, like a hunting knife. He buys duct tape. He uses cash to make all these purchases. He gets cash back so that his parents aren't going to see these transactions on his credit card or anything like that. And of course, he thinks that ultimately, if it comes down to it, law enforcement won't see these transactions. He goes immediately next door at our local Walmart to Lowe's, where he buys a standard shovel. At this point, he doesn't have a car. After one of his conversations with Erica, where she says, I'm not going to be with you, he ends up driving kind of distracted and driving angry, and he damages his car fairly significantly. He runs the wheels of his car into some sort of curb or barrier, and he damages the tires on his car. Ultimately, on the day of the murder, we're able to identify and track his vehicle around Gainesville in surveillance video. GPD does a remarkable job with that part of the investigation, but we're aided in the fact that he never paid to replace the hubcap that was damaged in that crash. So his car, as it's driving around Gainesville, is hubcapless on one wheel. He was driving a blue SUV, which would not be terribly uncommon vehicle, but a blue SUV missing, I think it was the rear hubcap, becomes very easy for law enforcement to identify as he's moving around town.
The duct tape forms a chain that leads to you being the killer. So he had a roll of duct tape in his car. The University of Florida Police Department searches his car. They find this roll of duct tape. On his car, he has a cracked windshield. And on the windshield, he's put a piece of duct tape. They take the duct tape off his car and they take it into evidence. All of that duct tape goes to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and they are able to get it all unstuck and get it all back together, matching each edge from the roll to the window, to his feet, to his hands, to his neck.
Whoever duct taped that windshield also duct taped that body. And we know it's from the same roll.
As they are piecing the evidence together, investigators receive crucial information from an unlikely source.
You know, in the theme of Pedro thinking he was the smartest guy in the room, which he obviously was not, he spent about a month with a guy named Michelangelo in the Alachua County Jail. And it was like Pedro wanted us to know exactly what he did.
His lawyer, a woman by the name of Margaret Stack, had in her possession a letter that was written by Pedro Bravo that outlined a ruse in order to fool law enforcement into believing that there was a serial killer who was still on the loose, who targeted young University of Florida male students. So he believed, Pedro Bravo believed, that Michelangelo was a gang member who had the resources and ability to cause essentially a series of serial murders. And also what he had done is he had drawn a map for Michelangelo showing where he had left the shovel that was used to bury Christian Aguilar. And we went out to Spyglass Apartments, which is an apartment complex. It's the apartment complex where Pedro Bravo was living at the time. There are many, many boardwalks in Spyglass, and we looked pretty much every single one of them, and there was one more boardwalk. I looked at it and I thought, yeah, it can't possibly be there. So I walk over there and I look underneath it, and there's a shovel.
Of course, now we have the shovel. Now we have the body. We have the gravesite, and we have the car. And through those four things, we're able to look at the same types of soil sediment on the bottom, the undercarriage of the car, the shovel, the body itself, and the gravesite. And what's remarkable about that location, being near the coast, Levy County, it had it had very high concentrations of a chemical called goethite. Alachua County is almost goethite-free. Levy County has a lot of goethite. And so when Pedro Bravo was making statements about, I used this shovel, but I only dug around my apartment for lichen or for moss or for things to use in artistic displays, that was completely inconsistent with the dirt that's on the shovel. The dirt on the shovel is replete with goethite, and Alachua County has no goethite.
It was the same shovel that you could see him buying at Lowe's. You could even see where it was still so new that the shovel had originally come with a sticker on it that had its UPC code and the advertising for it, and you could still see that there was sand stuck to where the sticker had been.
While we learn of all the facts of the murder in terms of how the murder occurred within the Walmart parking lot, we learn of all those facts through Michelangelo's retelling because it's what Pedro Bravo told him. And even if we might shake our head and say, well, do we believe a 9-time convicted felon who's facing life imprisonment? Because he knew where the shovel was, the answer is yes. Because the only person who knew where that shovel was the person who committed that murder. And it wasn't Michelangelo, because he was in jail on September 20th, 2012. So he didn't commit the murder. So he either committed the murder or he talked to the person who committed the murder.
From Michelangelo's statement and all the evidence compiled, investigators now believe they can piece together the malicious events of September 20th, 2012. By 2014, Gainesville police accumulate enough evidence to piece together how 18-year-old Christian Aguilar was killed by Pedro Bravo in September 2012.
Chris and Pedro were friends, and ultimately Pedro plays on this friendship in order to convince Christian to meet with him. The way he gets him alone is he says, I really need to talk to you. I'm thinking about harming myself. I'm thinking about killing myself. You're my friend. We've been friends forever. So he uses that friendship to get Chris to meet with him. Chris doesn't want to meet with him. Chris has no interest in this. There's no time for it. He's very busy. He doesn't want to do this.
And he knows that it needs to be sort of in a public place. It needs to be in a place that's not going to be, scary or off-putting to Christian Aguilar. They agree to meet at the Hub, which is the local campus student union. It's a place that would be very well known to Christian Aguilar, and Christian Aguilar suggests it. They go from the Hub to the local Best Buy, where they buy a CD. And the importance of that is, we see his cell phone and how good the cell phone is at tracking him. Because we can see their entire day as they went from the Hub to Best Buy. They went across the parking lot to Zaxby's for lunch. And all these things are kind of exactly as Pedro described how he wanted to do it. He was going to meet him on campus, get him off campus, suggest lunch places off campus that weren't available on campus, like Zaxby's, so that he could try to get Christian Aguilar alone. He needed him alone for a period of time, but he needed him alone in a place where Christian Aguilar wouldn't be fearful. They parked in the parking lot at the Walmart, and it's there that they stop, and presumably they're going to talk for a moment, because ultimately the car is parked at the Walmart for about 2 hours or more, and doesn't move. No one gets in or out of the vehicle. The vehicle never moves, and it's just still for 2 hours. And in that time frame, clearly Pedro Bravo probably administers the Gatorade that he had put the sleeping pills into. That's probably provided to Christian Aguilar. It probably puts Christian Aguilar into a sleepy state. And then using some sort of reason to get into the back seat, Pedro Bravo moves from the driver's seat to the back seat, and using what we believe to be some sort of tire strap or moving strap, he reaches to the front seat and strangles Christian Aguilar. Pedro Bravo tells an inmate that he's housed with, it took about 13 minutes, he says, for Christian to die. Christian obviously struggles. He reaches for the door. He scratches the ceiling, but it's too great to escape. Ultimately, Pedro Bravo buries Christian Aguilar face down in a shallow grave in a manner that the Human Identification Lab would call an enemy burial. Even though he's in airplane mode on his cell phone, the internal workings of the cell phone record what the cell phone is doing. So GPS isn't telling anything of where the cell phone is, but the cell phone itself knows what it's doing. And during that period, we see a dramatic drop for 48 minutes of his battery. His battery goes from very well charged to a fractional amount of the battery very quickly over 48 minutes. And the investigators are very keen to point out that that's the use of the flashlight app. He couldn't use the headlights on his vehicle because he's in a private hunting camp in the middle of the night burying a dead body. So your headlights aren't an option. But his flashlight app was all the light he could use, and it appears that for 48 minutes that's exactly what he did.
Pedro Bravo's trial finally begins in 2014, and with the mountain of evidence compiled against him, the defense are facing an uphill battle.
I think the defense had a very difficult time in defending their client. And that's because there was a lot of evidence, a lot of physical evidence, there was a lot of visual evidence. You had cameras all about Gainesville, seeing these two guys hanging out with each other up until the minute that Christian went missing.
When Pedro took the stand, I was wondering what in the world was he doing? How in the world could he explain his way out of this? And what struck me was the absolute deadness in his eyes. I made eye contact with him, and it was the most unique experience I've ever had. It was just black and dark, and there was nothing behind his eyes.
I stopped crossing him because there was no point. It was such an incredible lie that no one was believing it. No one in the courtroom believed it. The jury didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. My co-counsel didn't believe it. I don't think his counsel believed it.
Following the trial, it isn't long before the jury comes to a verdict.
This was a relatively fast verdict. I would say probably inside of 2 hours. But the evidence here was overwhelming. It would not have taken a jury long, I wouldn't have suspected, to find that he was guilty. And of course they did. They found him guilty of all counts. They found him guilty as charged, including, most importantly, premeditated first-degree murder. Florida law only allows for one sentence for premeditated first-degree murder, and that is a sentence of life without parole. So he will, remain in prison for the rest of his natural life.
What was the driving factor that led to such a horrific murder?
I think that this is a case of two forces interacting at the same time. One is a mental health illness, and two is jealousy and romance gone awry. And when those things hit each other, terrible, terrible things take place. And that's what we saw here.
I firmly believe that Pedro Bravo was absolutely jealous of Christian Aguilar. He was jealous of the life that he had. He was jealous of the opportunities that he had. And if Pedro could not have those opportunities, he was going to make sure that Christian couldn't have those opportunities anymore.
With Pedro Bravo behind bars for the rest of his life, Christian Aguilar's family tried to come to terms with the death and honor him.
Christian was interested in and graduating from biochemical engineering. When he was killed by Pedro, those dreams stopped. It was very honored for us that the UF, months after Christian passed away, brought us to Gainesville to give us the recognition that he was graduated from biotechnical engineer. So he's a post-mortem engineer, and he's the first one in the Latin culture to receive that. These tragedies do happen, and that we are not doing enough. The authorities don't have the capacity to look for every single person. We think that everything that is happening outside of your environment is not going to happen to you. The bad things don't happen to good people, and unfortunately that's life.
December 1994, Catasauqua, Pennsylvania. A woman and her infant son are reported missing.
He called the police and he said, "Something is wrong. His wife is missing."
Their disappearance sends shock throughout the community.
Everyone is easily able to identify with a situation like this and kind of put their own family in their shoes.
There was some worry that she had been kidnapped or killed, and that there was a killer out there. So there was some fear in the community.
4 months later, and their bodies are discovered in rural woodlands, brutally murdered.
The cause of death for Joanna was a gunshot to the face, to her head. And they could tell that it was a .22 caliber bullet.
When the police finally identify the suspected killer, They deny all knowledge.
She professed her innocence, and she made the case that she had done good things in life.
The fact that she had lied about owning a gun, the fact that she had no alibi that stood up.
This is the heart-wrenching story of Joann and Alex Katrinak, their terrifying disappearance, and what fueled their killer to commit such a murder.
The jealousy was so great that this became the motive for murder.
Catasauqua is a picturesque city and historic steel town in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania.
Catasauqua is a diverse community. We have approximately 6,700 people. We're 1.3 square miles, and we're bordered by Lehigh Valley International Airport, the city of Allentown, Whitehall Township, and to the north, North Catasauqua Borough. We do have our share of crime, but not so much violent crime.
On December 15th, 1994, Andy Katrinak arrives home to an empty house. Unexpectedly, his wife Joann and baby are not there.
He came home, I believe he noticed that preparations had started for dinner. There was some chicken out, but she wasn't home. He thought she might have been home already, and she was not. He waited a little while, and I believe it was around 8:30, he started to get more and more concerned she wasn't home yet, and called his mother. She was actually supposed to meet his mother earlier in the day to go Christmas shopping. And his mother said that Joanna had never shown up.
You can imagine what's going through this poor man's mind at the time. He works hard all day. He's been doing that for a while, working on some friend's home about 10 miles from home. In the days before cell phones, he hasn't been in touch with his wife or his baby, who was 4 months old, by the way, all day long. Gets home. She's supposed to be home. He knows that she's gone shopping. So at first he's thinking, maybe she was held up shopping. Things are not so startling to him at that time that he sits down. I believe he has a beer. Maybe he looks at the paper. But then he starts getting worried, and he starts going through the house. And he goes down to the basement, and he sees this basement door, this old basement door that they never use, is ajar, and the hinge on it has been broken. Amazingly, though, he doesn't immediately think break-in, kidnapping. He thinks kids, teenagers. He doesn't think that someone has really done anything because he can't find anything amiss in his house. Nothing seems to be taken. Everything seems to be in its own place.
But as time passes, Andy grows concerned and contacts the police.
When Andy called the police about 10:30 that night, he reported that the back door down to a basement area had been left ajar or broken into.
I just talked to Allentown Police, and they told me to call you guys. I live in Caddy on Front Street. Okay. And my wife and my baby have been missing since like 2 o'clock this afternoon. And we just discovered that the downstairs basement door was jimmied open. And that's really got us worried now.
The trouble with police, no matter where they are, if they're in small town Americana or if they're in a large big city, there are so many incidents of missing persons that when a man calls, "Where is my wife? She was supposed to be with my mother-in-law to go shopping. It's now 10:30 at night and she is not home." Well, this is just another missing person. This is just another situation. The police generally do not get all that concerned.
Officers eventually respond to Andy Katrinak's house to follow up on the call.
So an officer responded to that 911 call, went to the address on Front Street, and started his initial investigation. He discovered a hasp on one of the doors had been broken, and he also discovered some phone lines were cut.
With police starting their investigation, they receive a second call, this time from Joann's sister.
It's now 3:30 a.m. in the morning, and Joanna still is not home. But her sister Peggy who knows what's going on and knows that Joann is not anywhere to be found, lives about 50 yards away from McCarthy's bar, and she sees Joanna's car, a tan Toyota, in the parking lot. There's nobody in the car. It's locked. They call the police.
LA County 911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, my sister, Joann Katrinak, has a missing persons out on her. We're at 740 Front Street, and we just located her car next door.
Next door?
Yeah, but she's not anywhere to be found still.
Joann's sister does make the call to the police. Now we found Joann's car, and amazingly, we found it in a place where she's never parked before. She had her usual parking spots. We're all creatures of habits, and hers, not unlikely, was right behind the house where they had a parking area. Also, the car was backed in, and Angie knew that Joann had a phobia about backing her car. She would work as hard as she could to avoid having to put that car in reverse. So now they call the police, and the police are out here again at the car.
The police come to the scene. They get into the car. They find the seat has been pushed way up close to the driver's wheel. That doesn't make sense to anybody. It doesn't make sense to Peggy. It doesn't make sense to Andy. The police start to look in the car, and they find blonde hairs that look that they're covered with blood. That doesn't make sense. There's a can of mace in the back seat of the car, and there's no baby paraphernalia. Wait a second. This is a mother who has a baby. There should be baby bags, diapers, bottles. Nothing's there.
I'd be looking at how many miles may have been put on that car since the time it was last filled. We'd do an investigation as to when the car was filled last. The hair from a dark-haired woman, why there would be light hair in that car would be a question to me. And why would there be mace in there?
Police start to suspect something sinister has happened and start examining Joann's background and home life.
Common in missing persons cases, police will come out and take a report, but particularly with an adult, they're not going to be overly concerned right away. When they start to look into it, when they start to believe there's something more sinister going on, the people closest to the victim are usually very early on seen as suspects. And so it's not unusual to look at the husband, the boyfriend, or even an ex.
Well, the first thing they're going to look at is look at the family members. Find out what the relationship would be between the husband and wife, what the relationship is in the family, and find out if there are any issues. That's the first place to start. Joann was 24 years old, had been in a previous relationship that resolved with some domestic violence, and she was quite younger than Andy, about 14 years younger than Andy.
Joann, according to her family and friends, was really living a life of Camelot. But here she was with a 38-year-old man, 14 years her senior. She had a new baby. All indications from friends were that she was extremely, extremely happy.
Andy was athletic. He was strong. He was tall. He was, well, Joann said he was everything.
But investigators know that appearances can be deceptive and start to check out Andy's alibi and other possible reasons for her disappearance.
So often the husband is an early suspect in one of these cases. Police also thought that Joann might have fled on her own. And thirdly, there was an ex-husband as well.
In December 1994, police in Catasauqua, a borough of Lehigh County in Pennsylvania, are investigating the mysterious disappearance of 26-year-old Joann Katrinak and her 4-month-old baby Alex. Police start looking to the alibi of her husband, Andy.
Police have a set, pat view of life as to who is responsible for criminality. The husband is always somebody who is a suspect. The ex-husband is always a suspect. And they look at these people because it turns out that most of the time there is some involvement that they can find by doing this search of the usual suspects? Well, in this case, Andy was viewed as a usual suspect, and they wanted to know, the police wanted to know about him. Well, his alibi and his whereabouts were rock solid.
They're going to try and determine what his alibi was, what he was doing, what he might know about what happened. For Andy, he was working at a friend's house that day, doing some contract work. His father was with him for part of the day, and I believe the friend, the person that he was working for, came home and spent part of the day working with him as well.
Joann's family are also insistent that Andy has nothing to do with their disappearance.
Joann's family were 100% behind him. Joann's mother said, "There's just no way Andy could have harmed Joann. I see them. I babysat for them. I see how they relate to each other. They loved each other. There's just no animosity between the two of them. There's no motive." As you know, a husband is always the first suspect when a wife disappears. And so he was looked at really carefully by the state police. But one of the things that dropped him as a suspect was what the parents, Joann's parents, were saying about his relationship with their daughter.
With the clock ticking, the state police, who have joined the investigation, decide to re-examine the Katrinak's home and Joann's car.
State police secured the residence, processed the house, and also processed the car. Doing a good investigation and checking every possible lead is the best thing that you can do.
They wanted to examine the house again. They looked for fingerprints. They examined the door. The cut phone line had already been repaired, but they wanted to look at that area as well. And Joann's car was taken to be searched and looked through for evidence. As far as entry into the home, police found the attempts to remove screws from the door and from a window. They didn't believe that anyone got in through the window, and the door seemed to be damaged.
A few things that they did discover, and one of the things which is underrated, is they discovered no fingerprints of any note. There were some fingerprints found on some objects in the car, but there were no fingerprints on any of the portions of the car that a driver would have touched, like the steering wheel or the gear shift or anything like that. That becomes important later on when I can make the argument that someone wiped that car down. Someone tried to hide the evidence in that car. What they do find, though, is someone who tried to wipe that car down missed. They found a tiny spot on the backrest of the driver's seat where there were 6 long, dirty blonde hairs. Along with that, and attached to that, they found very, very minute traces of blood on the backrest of that car, in the same spot where the hairs were. And then later on, it subsequently was determined that the blood had been on the hair, and therefore got onto the backrest from the hair.
The thing to remember about 1993 is that DNA was just about to become a popular item, but it wasn't widely used. Common tools police used at the time were fingerprints and serology, blood typing.
Investigators are starting to run out of other leads.
So one of the reasons why police started to move away from the theory that Joann had simply run away. There was no usage on her credit cards. She wasn't accessing her bank, and she hadn't taken much with her. The only items that were really missing were her purse and the diaper bag. And family members said to police if she was going somewhere, she would have taken more than just that.
Reports of a missing woman and baby sends panic through the local community, and police start being inundated with calls and leads.
Nobody disappears in Chautauqua, in Pennsylvania. It just isn't happening. But in this case, there now was a missing person.
It always hits close to home when a member of the community, something like that happens to them, that they would go missing. Sometimes it all depends on what the circumstances are, whether the family isn't getting along. But most of the time when somebody goes missing, it's a concern to everybody.
Given the fact that it wasn't just Joann that was missing, it was also a baby, a young child, just new to the world. It really stirs the heartstrings, particularly given the time of year, Christmas. It's a time people are thinking of family, thinking of one another, and to hear that his family is being torn apart. With a missing child, a community like Catasauqua or throughout the Lehigh Valley, we're talking about a lot of families, a lot of grandparents. Everyone is easily able to identify with a situation like this and kind of put their own family in their shoes. So when they see the posters go up, they learn that a baby is missing, that a mother is missing, it really stirs the heartstrings, and oftentimes it leads to a lot of tips. Police receive more tips than you can imagine, and oftentimes they lead in a lot of different directions. Sometimes they don't help at all.
There were all kinds of reports. This happens every time there's a case. There's some people who want to inject themselves into the case, who want to become important by thinking they've seen something that's vital. In this case, I call them my rejects. There were about 30 to 50 police reports, and they even had the FBI in the early days follow up on some of it. There was a report that she was seen in the airport. A young woman was seen with a child. There was another woman who's insistent to this day that she saw Joann and Alex in a grocery store buying $100 worth of groceries with a tall, strange man that was with them. There was people who allegedly saw her on the railroad tracks.
The police start getting all kinds of reports, and those reports are often misleading. So difficult for the police to have all these strange reports. Oh, I saw her driving down the street. No, I saw her at the airport, came in a report. Oh no, she was at the store just yesterday. These are things which complicate the police's life. They don't know what to think. Is this just a young woman who has had it and gone off on her own, who ran away and went to the airport? Or is this a serious problem? This kind of thing confounds law enforcement. It happens all the time, and it's a dirty, rotten shame, particularly in this case.
The search continues, but Joann and her young son Alex have simply disappeared. Finally, 4 months later, on April 9th, 1995, the police make a breakthrough.
4 months have passed, and there still is no trace of Joanna. Nobody knows where she is. Everyone now is resigned to the reality that this young woman, beautiful mother of a brand new baby, is probably no longer with us. There's a Paul Kovacek who's in his tractor. He's a farmer. He's plowing his field, and he sees in the field clothing. It's April, so he's doing his spring plowing. And he says, gee, what is that? And he gets out of his tractor and he goes and he looks and he finds skeletal remains. He is absolutely shocked. There's clothes and there are bags and the baby things nearby, a baby rattle. And he is frightened. He calls the police. And now, the whodunit really hits the fan.
April 9th, 1995. A farmer has discovered skeletal remains in woodland in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania. The remains are believed to be those of Joann Katrinak and her 4-month-old son Alex, who have been missing since December 15th, 1994.
The discovery of the remains is terrible news when a community knows that somebody is missing and you hear that remains have been found right away. Just horrible thoughts are going through the minds of everyone that's been following that case. What the police found was the skeletal remains of an adult female, and the baby was clutched to her chest to the point where she had the child's face had sunken into her chest a little bit. That positioning, when they turned the child over, it actually had preserved the child's features. Nearby, they found a rattle. They found some other of the belongings of Joanna and Alex. And I believe on the diaper bag there were some blonde hairs, very similar to the blonde hairs that were found in the car.
that's a huge break because it gives us so many different things. Number one, it gave us some forensic evidence. It gave us 2 hairs that we found there. It gave us a baby rattle, a baby bottle, a diaper bag with its contents, which were so important in establishing time of death to me. But more importantly, it got us the area. Who would have thought to place these bodies in this particular area? Usually, if you're just trying to get rid of someone that you killed, it's going to be along some highway, not in some remote area that you'd have to take right turn, left turn, right turn, left turn to get from Catasauqua to get to this remote field. So it gave us the area and it gave us some evidence. So that was a huge break.
An autopsy of the remains is able to tell police the cause of death, and an etymologist is called in to assist with when the murders might have taken place.
Forensic science has ways by which we tell how fast insects will invade the body to determine how long the body had been there. Literally, there are body farms where the scientists study the rate at which the body decays, and we can date the time. Well, the insect invasion here would indicate that the body was about 4 months old.
They did the autopsy that was ruled a homicide on both the child and Ms. Katrinak. They also discovered that she had been shot in the head by a .22 caliber, and they also found that she had been bludgeoned numerous times with a blunt object. Well, the theory at the time was that Ms. Katrinak was abducted from the residence in Catasauqua and taken out to a remote location known by the suspect and murdered.
Investigators give Andy the heartbreaking news and ask him if there is anyone that would want to hurt him or wish Joann harm. Andy mentions a phone call that was received a few days before Joann went missing.
While Andy was being interviewed, he relayed to police a rather odd phone call that had taken place before Joann's disappearance. An ex-girlfriend of his had called, and Joann had answered the phone. There was some confrontation. It was a little bit confrontational. The ex-girlfriend, Patricia Rohr, had wanted to speak to Andy, and Joann had told her that that was not going to be possible and hung up the phone.
At this stage, investigators take Andy to the area where the bodies were found.
The police decided that they needed to take Andy on a tour of the area to see if he recognized anything or something was to ring a bell in his memory that might be helpful to them. They were driving around the Heidelberg area in Pennsylvania, and lo and behold, Andy says, "Wait a second. This is where my girlfriend, Patricia, used to board her horses. She would ride in this area. She knew this area very well." And the police said, we got a break. We got a break here. This ride-along has created a memory, and we need to follow it up.
As they started to look at Andy and some of the statements he made, and in particular in relation to Patricia, what they discovered was the night of the disappearance, or technically early the next morning, about 3 a.m., he had tried to get in touch with Patricia, even calling her mother.
So when the state police and the FBI went to speak with Patricia Rohr, they found, she explained to them that she was suspicious of the fact that they had had a child because she didn't think that Andy was able to father a child. She explained to them that she couldn't leave her residence for any length of time, that she had gone to the feed store to get some feed for her animals, and she had gone to a tanning salon.
After speaking with Patricia a second time, much of her alibi and description of events began to unravel. The first time she had been very helpful. She had spoken to police about Andy and his relationship, questioned his paternity of the child. But during this second interview, what they realized is she didn't have receipts for any of the locations she said she had gone to, including for the animal feed. And at one point she had claimed she had gone to a salon, and on that day the salon told police they were actually closed. Another explanation that Patricia gave for her whereabouts was that she had gone to a nightclub, Cowboys nightclub, When police went to check on that claim, they discovered that attendees had to sign in to the nightclub, and yet there was no sign-in for Patricia Rohr.
Police learn more about Patricia's background.
Patricia Rohr was an old girlfriend of Andy, a live-together type relationship back from, I believe, 1985 through 1989. They broke up. Seems to me it was fairly mutual. Patricia would then contact Andy. Andy would never contact her, but he'd be friendly with her when she would contact him by telephone. In 1990, Patricia Rohr asked Andy if he would help her out. Rohr was beaten up. Andy came to her rescue, and Andy let her stay in his home in 1990, the home where Joann was taken from, for about somewhat less than a week, sometime in 1990. That relationship with Andy, as far as Andy was, it was over. As far as Patricia is concerned, we believe that she still wanted to connect with Andy on some level.
The evidence gathered from the car and crime scene gives detectives a breakthrough in the case.
There were 6 blonde hairs in the automobile that Joanna drove, that her sister discovered in front of McCarthy's. There were hairs which were discovered on Joanna's body out in the field, which were covered with blood, as were the hairs in the car, also covered with blood. And that blood turned out to be Joanna's, or perhaps the baby's blood. They weren't able to make the positive match, but it was close enough that they could tell that it was either Joanna's or the baby's blood. And then, in addition, in the bags which were found at the scene of the crime, there were more blonde hairs. Now, Patricia says, I'm not blonde. I'm a brunette. I have dark hair, you see. And when the police went to talk to her, lo and behold, her hair was dark. It wasn't blonde.
Patricia was a big horse enthusiast. About the time of the incident, Patricia was involved in a riding competition. Police looked at some photos of that competition and noticed that she had blonde hair, not the dark hair that she had when they interviewed her.
But then a photograph surfaced where she was riding in a competition in Oklahoma just a couple weeks earlier than Joanna's disappearance, and she had blonde hair. The examination of the hairs that police found is that they had been bleached blonde, and this was the connection that the police were looking for.
And once a known sample from the suspect was obtained, Patricia Rohr, we would compare the question sample from the seat back of the car to the known hair sample of Patricia Rohr microscopically, so that we could see if the characteristics were the same or different. If they're different, that's where the examination would stop. The characteristics looked enough like the question sample from the hairs found on the seat back of Joann Katrinak's car for us to proceed with a mitochondrial DNA examination of that hair and compare the mitochondrial profile of at least one of those hairs on the seat back to the known mitochondrial DNA profile of Patricia Rohr. At the end, we found that the mitochondrial DNA profile from Patricia Rohr, the known, was the same as the mitochondrial DNA profile from the hair, which can't tell us that that hair came exclusively from Patricia Rohr, but at that point we knew we could not exclude Patricia Rohr as a source of that hair.
The things which led the police to have a strong, compelling case, one beyond a reasonable doubt, were the hairs. The DNA, the mitochondrial DNA match between those hairs found at the crime scene, found in the car, that they matched with Patricia. That really was what we would say game, set, and match. It was all over for her. But there was more. It was the lies which she told. The lies of saying, hey, I was at the Cowboy nightclub. You weren't there. Hey, I was at the salon. You weren't there. Hey, I bought feed at the grain store. Didn't have any receipts. Didn't happen. Those lies came back to absolutely haunt her. When the police went to Patricia's house and they arrested her, one of the police officers overheard Patricia saying to her newborn child, if I had known, I wouldn't have brought you into the world if I thought I was going to be caught.
But Patricia Rohrer pleads not guilty, and the case will go to trial. On June 24, 1997, Patricia Rohrer is arrested for the murders of Joann and Alex Katrinak from December 15, 1994. The Catasauqua Police and Pennsylvania State Troopers investigating the murders believe they have enough evidence against her to secure a conviction.
We have the DNA, which is clearly about 60% of our case, but we also have motive, opportunity, means, false statements, phony alibis, and behavior that's just not consistent with innocence. So based on that, I told my boss that we had enough to convict, and we filed charges against her, and she was arrested on June 24th, 1997.
When police zeroed in on Patricia and decided to make a move to arrest her, they caught part of a conversation she had with her infant child, where she said, if I had known they were going to catch me, I would have never brought you into this world.
While preparing for trial, investigators and prosecutors learn more about Rohrer's history.
Patricia had an odd background. It wasn't so odd as to that other people of her nature, of her ilk, didn't have similar backgrounds, but the oddities here were enough that they're noteworthy. She would live in North Carolina, then she would move away, and then she would come back. She was a car salesman with a car dealership where people said she was very personable. She worked in a photography studio with her mother, and she would do photography with clients that thought she was very good at this. Then she got into trouble with neglecting her animals, and she was charged with animal abuse, which became very significant in this case because she had to have the receipts for the feed which she fed the animals, and she didn't have it. And she was with Andy for a while, and then she was not with Andy, and then she wanted to get back together with Andy. And jealousy was so critical in the motive for this murder.
The little I know is that her father did die at an early age of hers. I think she had a back injury from a car accident. She had a marriage which didn't last very long.
Even after ending her relationship with Andy ended, friends noted that she continued to talk to Andy. Multiple ex-boyfriends mentioned that sometimes she would compare them to Andy. So for her to continue to call Andy, to find out that Andy had a child with another woman, that could certainly spark an obsession or an extreme jealousy.
Patricia Rohrer's trial starts on Monday, February 9th, 1998. The prosecution bases its case on forensic evidence, circumstantial evidence, and Rohrer's obsession with Andy Katrinak.
It was a powerful opening argument for the prosecution. They pointed to 8 items. They said that she had motive, she was angry over the phone call, she was looking to be in touch with Andy, she had a weapon that matched the murder weapon, she had lied to them, she was familiar with the family's home, and she was familiar with the location where the bodies were found.
I gave 8 different areas of evidence that we would be presenting, telling the jury exactly what I was going to do in the case. I also gave them, and it's standard for me, and especially in this case, I gave them a little warning about circumstantial evidence. In Pennsylvania and in most states, if not every one of them, circumstantial evidence, if strong enough, is sufficient for you to render a verdict of guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, since the evidence was largely circumstantial, I really beat that and made sure that they understood that sometimes circumstantial evidence is stronger than direct evidence. I believe that she surveilled the Katrinak residence from the late hours of the 12th to the early morning hours or the midday on the 15th. I believe that she saw Andy's comings and goings. I believe she learned from his comings and goings that he went early, arrived back late. I believe that she saw Joann's comings and goings. I believe that she saw where the car was parked. She knew the house. She knew this basement. I believe that she went down to the basement door. I believe that she first tried to take some plywood off the door, and then to make it look like there was no entry. I don't believe she wanted to make it look like a forced entry, because I believe part of her thinking was this would be pretty neat if they just disappeared and Andy became a suspect, or if no one thought that it was a murder. I believe that she didn't want to do anything there, but I believe that she wanted to abduct Joann and Alex. I have no idea if she meant to kill them right away. Maybe she wanted to get the last word with them to really give Joann a scare. I believe that when she heard Joann was going out, I believe that she ambushed her as Joann was putting Alex into the car. I believe she waited until Alex was put in the car, approached Joann as Joann was getting into the driver's seat, had the gun drawn on her, told Joann, get in and drive, and that she got in the back seat. I believe she had Joann drive to the spot where she remembered that she had ridden horses back in 1989 and 1990, because that was just a perfect place for her to have her little tete-a-tete with Joann. I believe that at some point Joann had to know what was going to happen and maybe started to yell. I believe that Rohr punched her in the face. Joann had a broken nose. I believe that there was a lot of blood from that. I believe that Joann struggled. I believe that Rohr won the struggle. And I believe that Rohr shot her and then stomped her. I believe that Rohr got back into her car, changed the seat so that she could fit into it, drove back, parked the car in McCarty's after dark. She wouldn't have done it during daylight. Got back in her van, which was parked somewhere in the neighborhood, not in McCarty's, and drove back to North Carolina.
This is a case of jealousy. This is a case of where a phone call is made and a woman says to another woman, get out of my life. I am with this man now. He's not yours. This is jealousy, which seems to be one of the most ancient of motives for killing. It was something that triggered an uncontrollable rage, which resulted in shooting a woman in the face, 19 bludgeoning injuries to her body, and the death of a newborn child. Jealousy. Powerful, powerful tragedy.
Some more really good detective work is our forensics showed that the bullet that was removed from Joann's skull could have been fired by certain types of firearms. One of them was a .22 Jennings. Other ones too, but it was circumstantial evidence they were looking for a possible .22 Jennings as a murder weapon. The death could have been caused by either the shot to the face or the blunt blows to the body. Either one separately could have been the cause of death, but blunt force and shot to face were the cause of death.
Police were never able to locate the firearm that was used to kill Joann. They did know it was a .22 caliber handgun. An ex-boyfriend told police that Patricia did have a .22 caliber handgun. She had purchased it from a gentleman in a wheelchair.
When they discovered the body in the field and the coroner examined it, they could tell that there was a gunshot right to her face, which was the cause of her death and the fatal blow, and they could tell that it was a .22 caliber bullet, which caused her death. They're looking for somebody with a gun, a .22. They asked Patricia, "Do you own a gun?" "No, she does not have a gun," she said. Well, that turned out to be an absolute lie. The former boyfriend of Patricia said, "Oh, gee, we went to a garage sale, and there was this guy. He was in a wheelchair, and he had a .22 gun, and he sold it to Patricia. But the gun was really strange because it only could do one shot, and then it would jam. So all you could expect from this gun is one bullet." Well, this was a lie that trapped Patricia.
I think that $50 gun was thrown away in the nearest pond as soon as the crime was committed. I had no idea, nor did my investigators, nor did my forensic pathologist, as to what blunt instrument was used to brutally beat Joann. I don't think we were thinking outside the box at the time.
The jury leaves to deliberate, and it is an anxious time for the prosecution and investigators.
My glass is always half empty. And so even though I thought we presented the best possible case we could, and I thought, parenthetically, that she was her own worst enemy, she convicted herself by her attempting to lie about every issue in the case. Ridiculous lies, things that made her, to anybody, look absolutely guilty. So I was pretty well convinced that she had convicted herself. But I'm always worried about what a jury is going to do. The jury was out 4 hours, came back with 2 questions, went back, half hour later, convicted her. This is after a 4-week trial. She got life in prison without possibility of parole. And, I have to say this, is that the victim's family, Joann's parents, were against the death penalty. They told me that, and so I did not advocate for the death penalty. But it's not my call. It's the jury's call. And this is a death penalty case. It really is. I mean, the murder of a woman and a 4-month-old baby. But I left it completely in the hands of the jury, and I did telegraph to the jury that I was not requiring or asking for the death penalty. I've never been a death penalty proponent.
I was happy that our exams worked and gave the prosecutor information that could be used to help the jury make a decision about what happened in the case.
If I was going to ask Patricia one thing, it would be, was it worth the life of a mother and child?
Vallejo, California. A crime is reported to police. The scene is one of carnage.
As you come up, you can see blood marks on the car, obvious blood marks, and there's blood all over the ground. The amount of blood that you realize somebody's probably dead.
In my 36 years in law enforcement, this is by far the most horrific murder scene that I've ever processed, witnessed, and been involved in.
The victim is Richie Lee Campood, the 33-year-old mother of a young family.
This poor woman had just gotten beaten to death.
He's swinging that bat with such force. He severed her spinal column. He caused skull fractures. It's a horrific scene.
Police identify Richie Lee's lover, 39-year-old William Abondo, as their prime suspect.
I think that he had a lot of anger built up over the fact that she wanted to break up with him, and he could not accept that, which he snapped.
This was jealousy, a murder out of jealous rage.
He lost control when she did not want to have the future that he wanted to have with her.
This is the story of how Richie Lee Campood was tracked down by a violent, obsessive lover, leading to a savage and tragic murder. Vallejo, located on the southwestern edge of Solano County, California, in the North Bay region of the San Francisco Bay Area. It's September 2010.
It was in the afternoon. The police received a phone call about 1:26 p.m. from a Gladys Busante, who stated that her husband, William Abondo, just called her and said that he had killed a lady by the name of Richie Lee Campud.
Sometimes you hear a call come in, and you can almost tell from the beginning there's not going to be any merit to it. This is just too crazy. But then there's calls you hear, and you're like, there just has the stink of this could be true. And that's what this was. So we jumped on it real quick, and we had guys researching addresses, names, and then I got on the road and started checking addresses.
Law enforcement officers now try to establish the veracity of the claim. They need to track down Richie Lee Campud. Police establish Campud lives on a street called Paddle Wheel in the Glen Cove area south of the city.
Once the police got the report that there had been a murder, they needed to do a welfare check to go to the purported victim's house where she lived with her mother and her brother, and to see whether or not there had been any kind of foul play. And the police inquired, and the residents there, the occupants, they didn't know anything. They hadn't heard hide nor hair of any problem.
Officers from the Vallejo Police Department went out to Paddle Wheel, and they spoke to her half-brother, and they also spoke to her parents. The whole family knew nothing. They didn't know a William Abondo. They said that she was married to a man who lives in the Philippines, and they had 3 children together. And she had been taking a nursing exam and was scheduled to be home by about 1 o'clock, and she didn't return home.
Police now learn more about the alleged killer, William Abondo.
From talking to some of the people at his work, he was compassionate to the patients, but he did have an anger streak. He spoke to some of the people at the hospital about what he would do to the victim. He's told people that he would kill her. He was having an affair with this woman. They both worked at the same location.
It appears the illicit relationship has recently been uncovered.
William's wife discovered the affair when William decided to go away for the weekend with Richie. I mean, talk about dumb. Not to cover your tracks, not to make up some kind of story, not to have some kind of basis where he would be able to go someplace undetected. And that created a terrible love triangle. She kicks him out of the house. He doesn't know what to do. He went to live with his brother.
He then begged for a divorce, said that he'd kill himself if his wife would not give him a divorce, that he was obsessed with Richie Lee and he wanted to be with her.
But Richie Lee, it appears, doesn't feel the same about her relationship with Abondo.
They must have had some kind of dialogue, whether it be telephonically or whether it be through text, that she no longer wanted to be involved in this relationship with him, which caused him to become outraged. I think that he had a lot of anger built up over the fact that she wanted to break up with him, and he could not accept that, which he snapped.
Police now try to track Abondo down. At this point, the case appears to be time critical.
They were trying to call the number that they were provided by Miss Basante. That was William Abondo's phone number. They were trying to call that phone number. They were trying to call Richie Lee's phone number that they would receive from the family. And so they were trying to locate Richie Lee and Mr. Abondo.
We'd gone to the residence on Paddle Wheel, and we spoke to Lyndon, and he had no earthly idea of any incident going on. Richie Lee was his, I believe, half-sister, half-sister, and she was staying there, and she was taking classes at a trade school to establish further licensing for her medical career. And he said she should be in class at that time that we spoke, and that was a place that we were checking for her too, her school, which was in Vallejo as well.
But there is no sign of Richie Lee. Police, however, soon get another piece of information.
A gentleman walked into the Vallejo Police Department very concerned because he had just been at Glen Cove Park in Vallejo and had seen this Tacoma truck that appeared to have blood on it. So he wanted to report that as suspicious, and so police officers were dispatched out to Glen Cove Park.
Investigators now head to where the caller says he has seen the truck with the blood.
I got the call to go to Glen Cove Park, which is located in a kind of an upscale community of Glen Cove, which is kind of detached from the most of the city.
This truck was just by itself in the middle of these parking spaces, and as you come up, you can see blood marks on the car, obvious blood marks, and there's blood all over the ground. The amount of blood that you realize somebody's probably dead. It's everywhere.
Next to the Tacoma was a very large pool of blood that measured about 7 feet in length and 2 feet at its widest part. It's just a lot of blood.
On the driver's side door, there appeared to be a bloody handprint near the opening of the door. There was blood on the truck. There was some blood on the wheels. There was blood even into the grass. There was blood onto the sidewalk. There was an extensive amount of blood on scene.
It appeared to me that this victim actually tried to get maybe back into the car. The fact that there was contact smear on the door and there was some fingerprints near the door and then may have been drugged or taken away, either in a different mode of transportation or drug into the bushes, which we eliminated. We had a helicopter come out and use infrared and check the vegetation and where the trees were, and that was negative.
Detectives run a check on the truck. They soon establish a connection to their developing investigation into what may have happened to Richie Lee Campood.
Further check showed the truck was registered to Lyndon and Richie Lee's parents. We know she'd been using that truck for transportation. So, the story's starting to kind of come together now, and things are not looking good.
In my mind, there was no doubt somebody was seriously injured, if not killed, based on the amount of blood, based on the high-velocity blood spatter that we saw.
A woman is missing. A man says he killed her. Police have yet to find a body, but right now, they fear the worst. In Vallejo, Northern California, detectives are trying to establish the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Richie Lee Campood. William Abondo, a man she has been in a relationship with, claims he has murdered her. Despite locating a heavily blood-stained truck, police have yet to catch up with Abondo or locate Richie Lee's body.
What we did is we just looked around for any kind of trace evidence, physical evidence, try to determine what happened. We obviously don't have the victim, and some of the things that were going on was, where is this victim? We have a lot of blood. We alert the local hospitals to see if a victim has been brought in, but in looking at this scene, it appeared to me to be a violent act that took place versus an accident.
Police are also learning more about Richie Lee Campood.
Richie was full of life. She wanted to better herself. She was going to school to try and get a nursing degree. She was taking an exam that she had studied hard for the day that she was murdered.
Richie Lee had come to the United States to further her career, and she had a common law husband in the Philippines. They had 3 kids. She came here and brought one of the kids with her, and they weren't estranged, and that she was trying to, establish herself here, and then I assumed for the husband to come over at a later time.
She was living with her parents. She was living with her family, her half-brother, her parents, that she was a loving sister, daughter, mother, friend, colleague, co-worker, and just kind of the life of the party.
Richie Lee's job appears to have brought her into contact with the man at the center of the incident.
Richie works at Pine Ridge Care Home, and she is a co-worker with William. They work together in taking care of the elderly residents of this care center. They became friends, and that friendship then blossomed into an affair.
He dated her until sometime in August, until Richie Lee's husband came out here from the Philippines for a couple weeks for vacation.
Richie Lee decides she wants her relationship with Abondo to end. She tries to break off all communication.
He wasn't hearing from her, and he'd call her, and he'd call her, and he'd call her, and she wouldn't respond, and she wouldn't pick up. And then after the husband left and went back to the Philippines, he said he still kept reaching out. He'd text her, he'd call her, and she kept telling him that she wanted it to be over. She wanted to be with her husband, she wanted to be the mother to her 3 kids, and she wanted her family to be together. And that any relationship that her and William had was over.
He wanted more out of whatever relationship they had going on that she wasn't willing to give. And she may have realized that, hey, you know, this affair is not going anywhere, and maybe had a sign of guilt that, you know, I need to focus on my family, my relationship with my husband, and not have this affair with Mr. Abondo, which he was unable to accept.
That was very upsetting to him and made him very distraught because he had given up everything in his mind. He had divorced his wife of 13 years. He was leaving his family, his wife and his 2 kids, for this woman, and that she could not leave him.
As police are examining the crime scene with the blood-covered truck at its center, they receive a new communication.
In that time, there was a 911 call made to the police department from a gentleman named Manny who lived up in American Canyon. And what he described to the police was he worked with the defendant, Mr. Abondo, in San Rafael. They were co-workers, and he got a call at about 4 o'clock from Mr. Abondo saying that he'd killed Richie, and Manny did not believe him, and so he started describing that she is here with me, and Manny started to believe that maybe something bad did happen. He got another phone call from Mr. Abondo about 4:26 p.m., and Mr. Abondo said, "I'm out in front of your place."
Manny came walking out, saw the car in the parking stall, walked up and saw Richie Lee in the right front compartment of the car, and he freaked out and called 911 right away.
Within minutes, police from nearby American Canyon are on the scene.
The officer out there, as soon as he showed up and put 2 and 2 together, he realized, oh, this is the car from the bulletin, and he detained William, and William told him right there that he'd killed his girlfriend and she was in the car.
The crime scene is gruesome. It's clear there has been a struggle and that Richie Lee has suffered a horrific attack.
In my 36 years in law enforcement, this is by far the most horrific murder scene that I've ever processed, witnessed, and been involved in. The victim was basically saturated in blood. She was face down on the passenger seat of the vehicle. There was a baseball bat wedged in between the front passenger seat and the center console, and just blood everywhere.
It's a silver Scion, so it's a light-colored car, and it was just slathered all over the hood. I mean, there was smears all over the hood like a bloody person got drugged across the hood, just all over. There was blood running out of the sill of the car and dripping onto the ground, so it was just a lot of blood.
Her necklace is tangled in her hair. The skull has been bashed in with a baseball bat. There is a cardigan sweater around her face and neck, and it looks as though maybe William was trying to cover her up, or maybe he was using it to choke her with. They can't quite tell.
There was visible lacerations on her head, contusions, bruising on both of her shoulders. She was just annihilated with different injuries. she had a lot of blows with that baseball bat.
What they find gives police the probable cause they need to arrest William Abondo.
The officers from the American Canyon Police Department basically detained him in their vehicle until Vallejo Police Department could get there because they were kind of doing the missing persons case. And so it wasn't until Vallejo police officers got there that then he was subject to arrest and then placed in a patrol car and taken to Vallejo Police Department. But he was still in the clothes that he'd obviously been wearing at the time that he brutally beat her to death.
Abondo's clothes tell the story of his involvement in the crime.
His blue jeans had blood all over the legs. He had blood on his hands. There was no doubt that what he was wearing on that day was what he was wearing when he killed the victim.
Police now have their suspect in custody. But why has Richie Lee died this way? Did William Abondo act alone? And was he simply motivated by his jealousy? Police in Vallejo in North California have arrested William Abondo, a care worker accused of the murder of his girlfriend and co-worker Richie Lee Campood. Despite its picturesque location, Vallejo has a reputation for being a dangerous city.
Vallejo is a diverse community. It had a naval base there, and when the naval base closed, they started having a lot of problems with financing and people getting jobs and things. It's a shame because it probably has the most perfect climate on the planet Earth.
Vallejo is a quiet community that has the contradiction of being a high crime community. It has its overwhelming share of burglaries, break-ins, robberies, rapes, and murders.
I think at one point in the 90s, we were tied for #1 per capita murder rate in the country. And it just was, there was running gun battles in the street. There's people getting shot at every day.
I can remember it for years, being on the homicide team starting in 2009. I had tried 10 murder cases from 2012 to 2013 in trial, which was like unheard of. And I was just one of many on a homicide team. We've had a number of homicides, and I don't see that going down in terms of we've had, a lot of gang violence, a lot of gun violence, a lot of shootings, a lot of unsolved homicides in the recent years.
A recent killing spree by a man named Efren Valdemoro has particularly resonated with Abondo.
Just prior to this, we had another guy go crazy and killed 5 people. And it was a big story, and he was running around. Another, in a fit of rage and jealousy, killed 5 people, and it was just this wild case.
Mr. Abondo had made some statements that he would do what he referred to as the Vallejo Massacre Part 2. That showed that he definitely had the propensity for violence. He definitely had the propensity to commit a horrific act like he did.
When Abondo is arrested at the crime scene, the evidence of this violence is all over his clothing.
When the police first encountered William, they found him covered in Richie's blood. And that has got to be an uncomfortable thing, because once blood is on a person, it starts to smell, and then it starts to dry, and the odor becomes pungent. It smells awful.
The evidence is convincing, but there is still no guarantee that Abondo will communicate with detectives when it comes to interview.
A little bit of a busy day, huh? A little bit of a crazy day? What's going on today, man? Just tell me what's happening.
He talked to the police and gave them a detailed, bit-by-bit horror story of how he destroyed this girl.
This guy was void of emotion and was really pretty matter-of-fact about it. Almost like he knew he was right in what he did, and he was going to explain to you that I did these things. And, and we're all supposed to assume that Well, that only makes sense. That's kind of the way he was.
The story he now tells begins on the night before at his wife's home.
On September 19th, he was at the house watching the kids until about midnight, and that was kind of a common thing. They shared custody of the kids. He'd come over while she worked because they had different shifts. He left at midnight.
He goes to Walmart and he buys a baseball bat. There is video from the closed-circuit television showing him in the aisle swinging that bat. And that video becomes ominous because that becomes the murder weapon.
About 2:30 in the morning, he returned to his ex-wife's house, and there they had an extensive conversation. And it was during that conversation that he said he was having problems with Richie Lee, that Richie's husband had come to town, that she was ignoring his calls, and that even after he left, that it had turned cold. He said the relationship had turned cold and that she wanted it over.
It used to be when I call her, she always responds right away.
Sure.
And now it just kind of...
Not so quick.
Not so quick. That's when I get upset.
Okay.
He told his wife that, I can't even think about you. I can't even think about the kids. All I care about is her, and I can't get her out of my head. So he was extremely obsessed with Richie Lee and basically had told her there's no way that she can do this and go back with her husband.
This guy's the biggest narcissist in the world, and just that's it. He won't be denied.
I think that proved evident that he was insanely jealous, and he lost control when she did not want to have the future that he wanted to have with her.
It's September 20th, and Richie is taking an examination at the school where she is studying to be a nurse.
She receives text messages from Mr. Abondo at about 10 minutes to 12, and another 20 minutes later, he's saying, I'm waiting for you in the parking lot. He texts again and says, let's go eat. We know he's calling her to go eat with him.
When I called, her phone rang. I said, oh, hold on, let me go use the bathroom. I said, we don't talk it. Well, there's nothing we talk it anymore.
And she said there's nothing to talk about anymore?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's basically waiting there in the parking lot at a distance from where others would see him, waiting for her to come out of the test so that he can follow her to the destination in which he's going to confront her.
When she comes out to the car, he waves to her, she waves to him, and she gets in her car and she doesn't stop. She just takes off.
But Abondo isn't far behind.
She's driving towards her residence, and she knows that he's following her.
I think she realized at some point, this guy's going to follow me right to the house, and there's going to be a scene at the house.
She abruptly drives into the park there at Glen Cove instead of going home. And I don't know if because she didn't want a scene at her parents' house, she didn't want him at her parents' house, but she definitely did not want Abondo at her family's house.
She was probably angry when she turned into the park because witnesses heard her come wheeling in hard, like tires squeaking. And so I think she was like, it was going to be that, look, this is it.
The two former lovers now confront each other in the car park.
William parks his vehicle right behind Richie's truck. He gets out and he goes and he gets into the passenger side. She's in the driver's seat of the truck, and they start talking.
We took it out at that time, probably like 10, 20 minutes.
In the truck there?
In the truck.
Okay.
I'm trying to give me another chance,
Okay.
Because I don't want to come back to my ex-wife anymore.
Okay. And you gave up a lot of stuff.
I give everything for
Give
me.
your whole life.
I take everything. I give up all my family for her.
But Richie Lee, it appears, has made up her mind about ending the relationship for good.
Richie says, you've got to leave me alone. I'm going to have to get a restraining order against you.
And then what happened from there?
I can't control my anger.
Huh?
I get my baseball bat.
She sees him. She's trying to get out of her car. He swings the bat, misses her, strikes the car, swings again and strikes her in the face. And at that point, he continues to pummel her for we don't know how long, but we know that he continued to strike her repeatedly.
Was it always in the head, or did you hit her anywhere else?
Anywhere.
Just wherever it landed, or how many times do you think you swung that bat?
I don't know, I can't remember. That's, again, I cry what I did.
Yeah?
I cry.
He slams her with the bat on the head. The blood is pooling on the ground as he is beating her to death. It is a violent, unspeakable scene of horror.
She was clinging on to life. When he first struck her in the face with the baseball bat, she was pleading with him for her life.
She told me that she loved me. That's too late. I already did something bad for me already.
She fell on the ground to the point where the impression in the grass was almost perfect in placing her forehead or back of her head into that little spot.
He finally picks her up and puts her in the front of his vehicle, where he slumps her in the front of the passenger compartment on the floorboard.
Once he did that, he probably stood there and thought, what am I going to do now?
Abondo takes off and travels aimlessly.
So you put her in the car with you, and you drove up to Sacramento?
I hold her hand. They told me just drive me somewhere that we always go. We always go to PG sushi.
Okay.
He's driving her around across 3 counties, and he's making phone calls to various employees at this place of work in San Rafael. And he's telling people that he just killed the victim. And some of these people that he's talking to don't believe him and are telling him that, he's not telling the truth, that he's joking. So Mr. Abondo decides to take photographs of her using a cell phone and texts the pictures of the victim in her current state to these people.
What? He's advertising this? He's bragging about it? No one's quite sure. Or is he just such a mental defective that he doesn't know what he's doing?
He says that she dies on the way to Sacramento and that he starts to come back. And that's when he finally calls his friend Manny at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And because he doesn't know who he can trust, he keeps saying the only person I can trust is Manny, so I'm going to take her over to Manny's house.
When I arrived from their house, they said, you need to get out in there. So that's why when he get out, I said, I'm tired already.
Yeah.
That's why he called the 911.
Given the extraordinary state of William Abondo's vehicle, it seems surprising that he doesn't attract the attention of law enforcement or the public sooner.
It blows me away that this car drove from Vallejo to Sacramento, an hour drive at least, maybe an hour and 15, 20 minutes, and then an hour and 15, 20 minutes back. I made that drive 8,000 times, and that road is packed all the time. And I thought, how the hell does somebody drive around the Bay Area with this bloody car? And it didn't look like mud or dirt. It looked like blood on the car.
It definitely gave me chills, and it definitely showed the caliber of this person, that he had no wanton disregard for her life, and that he just wanted her to die in a slow manner.
Abondo's frank confession surprises the detectives at Vallejo.
I'm so used to just nobody helping you, nobody wanting to cooperate, just trying to grind these cases out from the dirt, from nothing. This thing had everything, and everything was kind of like almost handed to you. This guy did a brutal murder, and he's in custody, and there's evidence everywhere, and he's confessing, and you can't believe it.
As a homicide investigator, you really don't see that kind of stuff early on an investigation. So this individual obviously is unique in the fact that he wanted to tell somebody that he actually committed this crime.
Police have William Abondo in custody. They have evidence and a confession. They now need to prepare for a trial through which they hope to get justice for Richie Lee and her family. (2010) Vallejo, north of San Francisco's Bay Area. Police are investigating the savage murder of 33-year-old mother Richie Lee Campood. While police have a suspect in custody, Richie Lee's lover, William Abondo, they need to find out more about the details surrounding the murder. Key to this is the autopsy.
When I walk in the morning, there's an investigator's report, so I have some context. And then if the detectives are there from the jurisdiction, in this case Vallejo Police, I say to them, what's the story? And they tell me what they know. My main focus is to accurately describe the injuries and to be sure that the injuries are consistent with the story I've been told.
Looking at her body, things started to become very clear that this woman did everything she could to fight back. And this was based on the fact that she had contusions, she had bruising, on her arms.
She had a contusion on her right shoulder. She had contusions on the front and the back of her arm. She had an abrasion on her right elbow. She had a contusion to the ring finger of her right hand. So there were many injuries.
The coroner's count was 27 injuries, but there were likely more because they seemed to be one on top of one another.
She had contusions all across her buttocks, all across her back, her neck, her shoulders, her arms. He's swinging that bat with such force. He severed her spinal column. He caused skull fractures. It's a horrific scene.
The coroner's conclusion was this was death by unnatural means and a homicide.
Prosecutors now take the case against William Abondo to trial.
This case was laid out. You don't even have to rely upon DNA evidence, but you still do all those things. So you can say, yes, that blood on that bat belonged to this victim, and the blood in the car belonged to the victim, and the blood over here on this truck belonged to the victim, the blood in the parking lot, it belonged to the victim. It's important to just establish all those things.
Abondo, it appears, has implicated himself.
He called people, he gave photographs to people. In reality, as far as the investigative work of this case, he made it easy for us.
From my perspective, the fact that the injuries matched the story was very reassuring to me. So my job was to be accurate and to describe the injuries to the jury so they could understand them.
Unusually for a case of this kind, the defendant takes the stand.
I knew what the defense was going to be, that this was just a heat of passion. It was just sudden quarrel. He just kind of went into a rage. He didn't know what he was doing. So I was a little surprised, but I felt like he probably had to testify to explain that to a jury.
As a defense attorney, you don't want to have that defendant get up on the witness stand. The prosecution will humiliate, shred, embarrass the defendant, who is literally putty in the hands of the prosecutor.
I was surprised to hear what he said. Again, that shows you the kind of person that he is, that he just did not care. He's absolutely a sociopath, and that he had no feelings whatsoever, post-feelings of killing this poor victim.
In court, William Abondo's wife comes to his defense.
At the trial, she's very defensive and protective of William, and she tries to explain that he's not a violent man. She tries to assist him in his defense, that he just snapped.
I think that he had a very controlling relationship over her. I know that when she was interviewed originally at the police department, before she changed her story at trial, she described of a very violent offense that had occurred in her home where he'd taken a knife to her chest, that she was scared of him. So I think that she was scared of him. I think also he worked. She was the mother of his kids. They resided together. I think for a whole host of reasons.
You're willing to stick up for her life for this guy who murdered someone, and brutally, and you know, what are you going to do? You hope he gets out of jail so he can come back and be your husband and the father of your children again? You should be afraid of death of this guy, because this might be you.
When the jury leaves to decide on the case, they deliberate on the facts they've heard, but still have some questions.
The issues were not whether or not William had done this. It was crystal clear. That was not a bone of contention. But it was the degree of culpability. His defense was one of instant rage and having snapped. If you accept William's story, this was manslaughter. He just snapped. If you accept the prosecution's story, it's murder one, deliberation and premeditation.
Well, I think it was completely premeditated. He goes and tells his wife, you know, he's distraught. He can't live without her. This can't happen. He's obsessed with her. He buys the bat in the middle of the night, knowing that he's going to go meet her where she is vulnerable because she's coming out of a test. And we know how vulnerable she was. She's like 5'3", 120 pounds, just coming out of a test, and he just beats her down to a pulp until he kills her. They're in broad daylight at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I think that it was building up, and I think the icing on the cake was when she says, listen, if you're not going to stay away from me, I'm going to get a restraining order. And he was like, you're dead now.
But the verdict is conclusive.
They convicted him of first-degree murder, and as I think about it, I think there isn't a jury in the land that wouldn't have also convicted him of first-degree murder.
To be quite honest with you, it's like, you know, having 1,000-pound weight on your chest, and when you hear the fact that, you know, this person was found guilty, I can't even describe what the relief is, that the hard work that everybody put in paid off.
But there is more drama to come.
When we went to sentencing, obviously he was facing life without the possibility of parole. I remember the family being there throughout the trial, and they were there at the verdict, and then they were there at sentencing. I believe it was Richie Lee's dad was kind of in the front row behind us in the courtroom, in Judge Carter's courtroom. And at some point, Judge Carter turned to the defense and asked Mr. Abana, do you have anything to say? And his only words were, she deserved it.
Richie's father became enraged, and he jumped over the bar which separates the audience from the attorneys and the judge, and he lunged at William. The bailiffs had to restrain him, and the scene was one of absolute pandemonium.
I remember the bailiff took him into the holding area in the Vallejo courthouse, and I learned that the father was down there and being detained or arrested or something, and I just remember having to come down there and pleading with him for, I would say almost an hour, to let him go and issue him a citation for an assault or a battery, and our office will deal with it. Because I could not believe, given the horrific beating and killing of their daughter, and then for him to say that she deserved it. Of course, emotions were running higher than you can ever imagine.
With Abondo convicted, is there any form of closure for the family of Richie Lee Campood?
I think to a certain extent what we do is intrinsically frustrating, because no matter what we do, the victim is still dead, and nothing can fix that. I do think we do what we can, and there's a certain nobility in doing what we can. And I do think that if justice is served, it does help survivors.
Despite a belief that prison can reform, Most believe that William Abondo deserves his incarceration for life.
He's a true sociopath, and he cares nothing about anybody else but his own wills and whims. That's it. And if you deny him, you see what happens.
Like, this guy had the nerve to say she deserved this. Like, at that point, it's been a year and you still aren't remorseful for what you did. It's unbelievable to me. You're a father, you're a husband.
I do not think a person like him is rehabilitatable. And if he's ever released, he's going to be a danger to the society, to the community, and to our well-being.
For the family of Richie Lee Campood, they must try to rebuild their lives without a wife and mother.
All these cases that you look at and these people that meet these brutal ends, their last moments on earth were absolutely horrendous. And if this was my daughter, sister, I don't think I'd ever get over that, especially if it's your child. Knowing that your child's last moment was pure terror.
The family never gets over it. It is the family who is left to bear the deep moral tragedy which has taken place.
I think the human element stays with you more, that, here this lady had 3 children and they've lost their mother. She has 2 parents who've had to bury their daughter. I don't think that there's ever really closure for the family whose loved one has been killed at the hands of another.